Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Muskoski, and I'm from the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. Welcome to today's session, Strengthening Your EWS Strategy Through Relationships. Please allow me to share some brief details about the session. Today's presenter is Delia Hagan. Delia is a licensed certified social worker serving as a program director at Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. In this role, Delia supports the development of the National Mentoring Resource Center, a comprehensive online resource hub for the mentoring field. Delia also manages national programmatic initiatives, including training and technical assistance. Today's session will last for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes and is being recorded. We'd like to encourage everyone to utilize the chat function at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to submit questions or comments for presenters. Please be sure to select everyone from the drop-down box to ensure that your comments and questions are seen by me and our speakers. You may submit your questions throughout the presentation, and we will leave time at the end to address as many questions as possible. If we do not have time to get through all the questions, we will reply to all participants by email over the next 5 to 7 days. All participants have been placed on mute to avoid background noise. Please do not unmute yourself, but rather use the chat function on the right side of your screen. Following the question and answer portion of our session, there is going to be a brief poll. Your participation in these polls is really important to helping us better prepare our presentations and ensure that we are delivering content to you in a way that best meets your needs. We greatly appreciate your feedback on the questions. Before I hand the session over to Delia, I would like to remind folks of the upcoming webinars that will be held in November. You will see more information and a link to register for those webinars on the last slide of this presentation. Also, I'd like to share the mission of our National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. The mission of this center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Delia.
Thank you so much, Linda, and it's great to be on the webinar today. I was participating in a few of the plenaries yesterday, so I'm really glad to see that we've got some folks, hopefully some of you were able to join yesterday also, and we can kind of build from a lot of the knowledge that you gained from those excellent speakers yesterday. But just wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and before we jump into the content that we have to share, I wanted to introduce my co-presenter for the day. Her name is Abby Lormer, and she is a Program Quality and Training Vista here at Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. And she coordinates our Mentoring Connector and our National Quality Mentoring System at Mentor, which are two programs that we facilitate to support mentoring programs throughout the country. And she's going to be kicking us off in just a minute. I just wanted to also mention that we do have another fabulous panelist joining us who's going to be speaking a little bit later. I'm going to introduce him around 1:15, and his name is Daryl Davis, so we'll give him a proper introduction around that time. But for now, I'll kick it over to Abby Lormer to get us started.
So I wanted to kick us off by telling you a little bit about Mentor and what we do, for those of you who may be less familiar with us. Mentor's mission is to fuel the quality and quantity of mentoring relationships for America's young people and to close the mentoring gap for the 1 in 3 young people growing up without this critical support. And we've been working for more than 25 years to advance these goals by developing and delivering evidence-based resources and tools to the mentoring field. We also support a network of 26 state and local affiliates who help to build the capacity of local mentoring programs and propel the mentoring movement in their regions. These affiliates are the local experts, the boots on the ground that make our vision a reality, and many of them have provided invaluable support to the Success Mentors programs that we'll be talking with you about today. Some of the specific strategies and tools we employ that may be of interest to you: we published the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, which details research-based and practitioner-informed standards for managing a safe and effective mentoring program. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. And we also provide training and technical assistance to diverse mentoring programs across the nation that is based on these standards. One of the ways we do that is through the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention's National Mentoring Resource Center. Just go to www.nationalmentoringresourcecenter.org to check out the no-cost, evidence-based resources for mentoring practitioners that are available to you there. And finally, we operate the only national database for volunteer mentoring opportunities, the Mentoring Connector, which will be of interest to you if you are looking to recruit mentors from your community to help meet students' needs. Thought and practice leader in providing training and technical assistance to mentoring organizations using the elements of effective practice for mentoring as a guide.
Thank you so much, Abby, for that intro. And now I'm going to just move us into kind of connecting the dots between what folks learned if they participated in yesterday's sessions. Don't worry if you didn't, because we'll be giving you some really specific information today that will make sense even if you weren't able to join the sessions yesterday. But I did want to just connect the dots a little bit. So yesterday you heard about early warning systems and how students signal that they might be off track in navigating key transitions that are essential to graduating college and career ready. And as you know from the second plenary, if you joined, you can develop school and district-wide systems for tracking individual students' attendance, schoolwork, and behavioral indicators, like suspensions, which will position your team to then intervene before students get too behind. And that's the whole goal of our EWS community of practice. So we know from those great plenaries yesterday that the earlier we intervene, the more likely it is that students are going to be able to get back on track and start working towards their goals. But how do you intervene? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So once you know which of your students need support and have a sense of what they need, what do you do next? Well, we here at Mentor, we know that no intervention is effective without relationships. Relationships are the center of every successful student support intervention. They're very much at the heart of meaningful transformations in students' experiences and outcomes. And when Bob Balfans discussed early warning systems yesterday, he noted that part of a successful systemic EWS strategy is knowing how to assign the right intervention depending on what a student's specific need is, and to do this in a systematic way. And he mentioned human systems that make or break the effectiveness of our work with students, and that's really what we're going to focus on today. These human systems, which we here at Mentor refer to as mentors, and that's what we're really focused on. So when I was thinking about the connections between mentoring and what you all learned about yesterday, I was also thinking about the tiered interventions that Bob, Paul, and Jeanette mentioned. And when we talk about tiered interventions, meaning, you know, individual student interventions, whole school interventions, and then targeted interventions that focus on specific groups of students, generally we're talking about mentoring as sort of a tier 2 intervention. So it's a targeted support that you put in place for a student who's identified to either be chronically absent or at risk, for example. And that can be a preventative and a protective approach for that student. But mentoring is also much more than that, and relationships and mentoring can really play into each level of your tiered intervention strategies that you may choose to put in place as a school or as a district. You can, for example, build a culture of mentoring at your school that supports whole school relationship building in time for students and adults, or students and other students, to connect with each other. So that's very much a tier, a tier 1 whole school intervention. We can also identify which students are at risk for chronic absence and then systematically support them through a targeted intervention to help them build relationships with mentors to provide the specific support they need. And then, even though mentors aren't clinicians, mentors can also help recognize when a student needs more intensive individualized support to ensure that they can access their education. And so that's really where it plays into the tier 3 strategies that we're learning about. So as we move into this conversation about mentoring and relationships as they relate to EWS, I really wanted to highlight this quote that you see on the slide. It says, "The perception that teachers care about their students is among the strongest predictors of student performance." And I'm always just, so grounded by that quote. It really kind of always takes me by surprise to think about the impact of the way that adults perceive students, and how students always sort of know how we perceive them and how impactful that is on their success. This comes from Carol Dweck, Gregory Walton, and Geoffrey Cohen's research about academic tenacity, if you're familiar with it. And that's where they investigated the non-cognitive factors that promote long-term learning and achievement for students. And so when they looked at students' ability to overcome challenges and persevere toward long-term goals, relationships with teachers were among the biggest indicators of their success. And that means that there's just so much promise that we can tap into when it comes to these relationships between youth and all the adults in their lives, not just teachers, but other caring adults in school and after-school spaces, especially when these relationships are built systematically, intentionally supported by the school, by the district, and when they are really, built into the fabric of what we all are doing on a daily basis. And so we know that there's many challenges and sort of obstacles that we have to overcome to really support relationship building. I'm sure the folks on the line today have many, many examples, and actually I wanted to invite you to feel free to type those into the chat box and tell us, what are some of the barriers that you've faced when trying to help students and adults build relationships with one another. The top of mind, the challenges that come to my mind are crowded classrooms, packed schedules, the intensity of testing prep, all of these pressures that teachers and other potential mentors have that can really make it difficult for them to achieve the kind of trust, positive regard, warmth, respect that really classifies these caring relationships. So today we're going to talk about some potential strategies for intentionally supporting the building of relationships in schools so that students do feel that they belong, that they know that they're cared for, and that they receive the support that they need to succeed. So we hope you'll go ahead and chat in some of those challenges as we move on, and hopefully we'll have a chance to revisit them later on. We definitely want you all to participate through the chat feature as we move through so we can kind of incorporate your thoughts and comments in the presentation today.
So if you chatted in some barriers that can limit relationship building, you might also see some of them on the list to the left. These are the challenges that limit student achievement, and unfortunately there are so many more that we know could be added here. However, here at Mentor, we know that support from mentors can address these barriers. While we can't fix every problem a student has, mentors help us understand students' and families' challenges, connect them with needed resources, and provide additional supports, both in the form of academic support at times or emotional encouragement, as well as a sense of belonging and purpose. By being a consistent adult presence in a young person's life, mentors can offer advice, share life experiences, and help a young person navigate challenges. These are such critical components to a student's success, and we wanted to share a few statistics from mentoring research that help illustrate this. Mentoring has a significant positive effect on 2 early warning indicators that a student may be falling off track. These are high levels of absenteeism and recurring behavior problems. Students who meet regularly with their mentors are 52% less likely than their peers to skip a day of school, and 37% less likely to skip a class, and that comes from a public-private venture study of Big Brothers Big Sisters. Young adults who face an opportunity gap but have a mentor are 55% more likely to be enrolled in college than those who did not have a mentor, and you can find that in the mentoring effect. In addition to better school attendance and a better chance of going on to higher education, mentored youth maintain better attitudes towards school, and that comes from the Role of Risk from 2013. As I mentioned before, Mentor's mission is to close the mentoring gap, and we know that 1 in 3 young people in America are growing up without someone like this, someone who cares about them, assures them they are not alone in dealing with day-to-day challenges, and makes them feel like they matter. But schools are a place where young people are interacting with caring adults every single day. That's why Mentor considers schools and districts such an essential partner in achieving our goal. If schools can find ways to intentionally support students in building relationships with caring adults, we can help to close the mentoring gap. And the reason Mentor cares about attendance is because students can't benefit from school if they aren't there. There are so many positive outcomes we want for youth, from graduating from high school to going on to a meaningful career or pursuing higher education, being an engaged and informed citizen, giving back to their community, and living safe and healthy lives. All of these outcomes are tied to whether they are in school, so we see attendance as one of the most urgent goals of our mentoring work in the education space.
Thanks, Abby. So how can a mentor support attendance? We're going to talk more about these systematic approaches and the models in a few minutes, but just wanted to share this slide. I know that I believe Bob Belfant shared a similar slide yesterday in the Welcome Plenary, and that's because this slide comes from his work and the work of the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University. So I won't go too deeply into this since I know you heard a bit about it yesterday, but to Bob's point, our goal when we're looking to address chronic absence with early warning systems is to uncover the true cause of a student's absence. So whether it's a myth like you see on the left there, you know, a student or a family member perhaps believing that it's okay to miss a day of school here and there and that doesn't have a major impact, or whether it's a barrier like unmet basic needs, transportation issues, housing issues, food, and those are unfortunately all too common stories that we hear, you know, that mentors are uncovering when they're working with students. Or whether it's an aversion like an academic struggle, students just can't quite access the material, their learning needs are not being met, so they just start to disengage from a particular class or from school in general. Or whether it's, you know, some examples of just overall disengagement, as you see on the right, not having meaningful relationships with adults in school is a reason why students may not feel that, you know, that's a place where they belong anymore. And so we know it just depends so much on a student's individual situation. And as you heard in yesterday's plenary, if you're creating an intervention without that true knowledge of a student's individual needs, you're really likely to do more harm than good. And mentors can really help ensure that our tiered interventions are really mapped to particular student needs, and they can also help deliver the supports that the students need. And you know, one thing that I didn't include but that comes to mind is that they're also helping inform the school. They can help tell the school if their interventions are working, and if they're not, why not? So they become these key informants and just critical assets in the work that we're doing around early warning systems. So what is the Success Mentors program? If you've been in some of these virtual conferences before through the National Center, you've heard about it. You may have heard it mentioned yesterday. But you know, what it centers on is our knowledge. This model is really built from the knowledge that when a student is chronically absent or heading towards it, you need to change a behavior or you need to solve a problem. And this mentoring program really gives us the ability to do that by pairing students with caring adults who can sort of, as I said, help uncover what's going on and build a trusting relationship with them where they can really become an advocate, a cheerleader, you know, a support, someone who can help them overcome whatever challenge that they are facing. And we also know that this needs to be rolled out in a systematic way. It needs to be supported. Teachers and counselors and other school staff are trying to do mentoring on their own. They're trying to be mentors. Many of them are, but until this is rolled out and supported in a strategic way, those folks may continue to struggle and feel unsuccessful. So that's really what the concepts through which the Success Mentors program was born. And so I'll tell you a little bit about it. It was the Success Mentors model was piloted and evaluated in New York City in 2012. And I'm going to share some results from that pilot in a little bit. But as we're walking through this model, we just want you to have a sense of what this is. It's an evidence-based model. Like I said, it was studied. And it had some promising results. It's resource-friendly, it's scalable and adaptive to student needs. And its effectiveness really relies on this idea of efficient and effective sharing of data about students' attendance. So the idea is that when a student is absent or comes to school late, the mentor is able to recognize that almost immediately, if not in a timely manner, and respond in real time so that they can actually help the student overcome whatever challenge it is that they're facing. And the idea, too, is to build these strong, caring relationships, not just with the student, but also with the family, strengths-based relationships that can really help promote a sense of belonging and inclusion. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's helpful to note that this intervention really builds a lot from the Tier 1 interventions you've been learning about in other sessions. So a positive school climate, welcoming messaging towards families. Success Mentors really builds from those Tier 1 interventions, but it takes it a step further and it says, how can we support in a targeted way the students who are really struggling and need this individualized attention? So I'm sharing here, this has sort of been shared in multiple forms, sort of a map of the model, and I'll give you a little bit of a tour of what's involved in the key components here. But like I mentioned, we've got these whole school relationship building strategies, this welcoming climate, family-centered environment, a culture that values relationships. Those are truly essential to the success of this model. So we always want to highlight those Tier 1 interventions and say, you know, you want to build from there if you're thinking about using a mentoring program to take things a step further. And at the center of this model, you've got this strengths-based messaging. So this idea that we don't blame families or students for not being in school. Instead, we try to understand what their experience is, and we take an approach of really partnering with them. You know, whether or not we agree with the reason that a student is not in school, it's really about that understanding and trying to bridge gaps at first and foremost. And then if you see on the right side, you'll see a targeted mentoring intervention for students most in need of support. So if you've done the data collection work of identifying which students are missing which days of school on an individual basis, so that's really critical to this model. If you've figured out which of your students are at risk, maybe they were chronically absent last year, or maybe they've missed a certain number of days in the first month of school, and so you know that they're going to need this support. You pair them with a mentor that builds a relationship with them, and that's their primary goal, to get to know the student, to make sure the student feels that they belong in school, to greet the student. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like a little bit later, to celebrate their successes and their progress, and then to really, again, uncover the needs that that student or family might have that may be getting in the way of not just their attendance, but also their success in school, and positions them as an advocate for the student. And then on the bottom, you'll see these weekly data meetings, and I know that the print is quite small there. We're going to go into this in a little bit more detail later too. But the idea here is that the mentor is included in a weekly meeting where they are able to collaborate with school administrators to coordinate social services that really meet the needs of the student that they're working with. So they are positioned as a part of that student support team, and they can inform the interventions that that student has to help support them. And it also helps the mentor sort of inform the school about what kinds of approaches they may want to take. Again, going back to the Tier 1 approaches, you know, what families or students might be facing that other families and students might be facing. You know, what broader family engagement strategies might the school want to consider to make things easier or more effective for everyone. And so who's included in those meetings? Mentors, the principal, school administrators, and then social services and community-based organizations that are able to provide the supports that students and families need. That's a really critical piece of this feedback loop as well, making sure that those folks, the referrals are being made, that those connections to those key services are being made. And then finally, going back to those Tier 1 strategies, again, the school is using all of this information, identifying patterns in student needs, and just ensuring that they are on target with the types of strategies that they put in place. That's sort of a picture or a map of what this model can look like. And as we've found, and as I'll share with you in a few minutes, this work has been implemented in lots of different communities across the country. You're going to hear from one leader, Dr. Daryl Davis, out of Kansas City Public Schools in Missouri, who's going to share with you what it has looked like in his community. But it has been rolled out in many, many diverse ways with some of these same fundamentals, but really customized to the community that's being served, because every student body is so different. I did want to share with you some of the outcomes from the New York City pilot that make this model so compelling, and something that the U.S. Department of Education really felt was important to scale nationally. So because these results were so promising, especially in particular around attendance and chronic absenteeism, they felt this was something that needed to be spread across the country and scaled in different communities across the country, 30 to be exact, 30 school districts in 2016 as a part of the MBK, My Brother's Keeper White House initiative. But I want to share with you some of these statistics. So, and you may have heard this in another presentation yesterday, so I won't go too deeply into it, but students who had a prior history of chronic absenteeism but had a success mentor during this pilot gained nearly 2 additional weeks of school, 9 days, which is educationally significant. And those results were even more significant in the top 25% of schools. There were some interesting impacts for high school students with success mentors, including those who had been over age for their grade. Those folks were 52% more likely to remain in school the following year. And as you can see, sort of to Abby's earlier statistics, these results weren't just around attendance, but they were also around schoolwork, motivation, confidence, and I feel, you know, it's intuitive for us to know that those things would improve, knowing that a student has someone in their life who cares about them, but it's important to see that there are really ripple effects to the kinds of outcomes that you see when a student starts coming to school more regularly and connecting with someone on a daily or regular basis. And I just want to share with you, I think a lot of folks that come to these webinars and convenings, they are sort of one person in a large system who may be interested in doing things differently and starting to make some changes. So it's important for you all as sort of ambassadors and advocates to know what can I share with other people at my school or district to get them to think about this or to consider this model. And so I like this slide because it gives sort of an overview of what's interesting and effective and compelling about this model, right? So there's some evidence of impact. This has been studied in 2012. It's now being scaled in these 30 communities, and there's going to be a national evaluation of the impact of the model in these different, very, very diverse communities. And so that's important to think about as you're considering, you know, implementing something like this in your school or district. There's clear and measurable outcomes. The focus is on attendance, but as we said, the ripple effects can be quite broad. The model is flexible, so like I said, it's been implemented in lots of diverse ways, using lots of different types of mentoring models. And in the breakout session that we're going to have later on today, if you're interested in joining us around 4:45 Eastern Time, we're going to talk a little bit more about specifically what does this program look like, what can it look like. There are lots of creative ways to do this work. And I'm excited to hear from Daryl Davis later on about the way that it looks in Kansas City. We also know that there's a lot of exhaustion in schools and districts about new initiatives, new programs, and we don't see this as the same, you know, the same old thing as just another thing to kind of roll out in the schools, a trendy, sort of a trendy new thing to try. We really see it as an enabler of multiple school improvement efforts. So it's a way to sort of coordinate existing efforts that are already going on in the school, build off of those, but really bring mentoring and relationships to the center of that work. It is cost-effective, particularly for schools who leverage their existing school staff, caring adults in the school who may already be mentors, but really support them in a more intentional way. We find that, you know, it's not necessarily resource-intensive. It does need to be done in an intentional way, but it can be cost-effective if those existing resources are applied differently, creatively, more in sync with one another. And it can be built from, it can be scaled, improved, enhanced over time. And again, I think the most important thing, if you take nothing else from this conversation, is that this is a strengths-based model. It really focuses on celebrating small successes, celebrating progress. This is something that we know works, both from mentoring research and from other types of research, from the public health world as well, and that it really engages parents and caregivers and families in a strengths-based way. So I could talk about this all day, but I'm going to kick it over to Abby to get us a little bit more specific now.
Thank you, Delia. So up until now, we've talked about the power of mentoring and the Success Mentors model. Now we'd like to transition towards digging a little deeper and talking about how these programs really work. Before we do, I want to note that later today, as Delia mentioned, we'll be having a breakout session focused on how Success Mentors programs and other forms of school integrated mentoring can be launched, managed, and implemented based on mentoring best practices. That webinar is a great one for the person who is going to be coordinating these programs to help understand what infrastructure and practices need to be put in place to ensure that programs are aligned with key quality standards. For the rest of this session, we'll be focusing on the guiding principles and concepts that make these programs work to help illustrate what's needed and who should be at the table when you're considering a mentoring strategy at your school or district. So let's start by talking about what exactly a success mentor is. As Bob mentioned at yesterday's plenary, a success mentor can be any caring adult in the school environment who is positioned to notice if a student is or is not in school and build a trusting relationship with them, and to provide a connection to support, care, and a sense of belonging in the school environment. A mentor could be a teacher, as we've discussed, but it could also be another school support person, a security guard, a custodian, a national service member, or even an administrator. The key is that the person is in the school environment enough to have a frequent interaction with the student. Notice when they are or are not there, and respond quickly enough to help support the student in dealing with any barriers to attendance. A good standard is for the mentor to interact with the mentee during the school day at least 3 times per week.
Thanks, Abby. And one thing we want to emphasize here is that while the success mentor's goal is to promote attendance, there really has to be an authentic and caring relationship built with the student, and ideally with their family first and foremost. And we know that that's a tall order, and it's not always easy. People are busy. But building trust and getting to know a student, it really takes time, and we just want to emphasize that this is the mentor's primary job. This is what makes the model strengths-based. Success mentors don't reach out to a student and their family for the first time when that student is absent and start trying to build a real relationship with them while also talking about the problem of attendance, right? Success mentors reach out to students and families to let them know that they're excited to be in the young person's life, to start getting to know them, and that part of their job is to support the student's attendance, but that they are first and foremost here to support the student, serve as their advocate, serve as their cheerleader, and to help them overcome any challenges that they might face, while also celebrating their successes with them. So that is so important to emphasize. We also want to mention that many schools have developed peer mentoring programs where older youth are paired with younger youth to support them in a similar way. This can be an incredibly powerful strategy since it opens up a large number of potential mentors who are right there in the school environment, other students, and this can really also have benefits for the mentors themselves. It can also do wonders for school climate and the sense of accountability that students have for one another. But these programs do require a lot of intentional support. They generally involve a fairly structured curriculum to ensure that they're facilitated responsibly and that they're really meeting the needs of both the mentor and the mentee, both young people in that situation. So these programs are out of scope for today's conversation. We're really going to be talking more about adults today. But there are some helpful resources on the National Mentoring Resource Center, which Abby mentioned earlier, for schools and districts that are considering that strategy. So we definitely welcome you to reach out to us about that if you'd like to talk more about it.
So as we just discussed, success mentors are matched with students who are identified as being at risk for chronic absence. This would be informed by the early warning systems you learned about during yesterday's plenaries. Once they are matched up, the success mentor engages in the activities and rules you see here on this slide. They greet the student in the morning and welcome them to school. They engage the students' families, and this is key. They do this for good things. They call home to let parents know that their student was on time every day last week, or that they were caught doing something kind for another student in the lunchroom, or that they sought help for a homework assignment so that they could get it done on time. Success mentors also meet with mentees one-on-one or in small groups to get to know them, hear about their day, help out with assignments or problems they may be having, and do fun activities that they don't have anything to do with attendance. And they also reach out to parents and students when the student is not in school to let them know that they were missed and to find out what happened. This is why it is so essential to have a positive, trusting relationship built with the student and their family. Those conversations must be strengths-based. They must be collaborative, and they must avoid judgment. As we know, many of the students and families that our schools and districts serve are facing complex challenges, and our only hope of helping them overcome them is to understand them. Rather than placing blame on a student or parent, reaching out to let them know that they were missed and that the mentor wants to help is a key role of the Success Mentor. The Success Mentor also tracks the student's attendance on a day-to-day basis, noticing any patterns and making note especially of improvements. This is again what makes this model strength-based. Mentors notice progress, big and small, and celebrate this, letting their mentees know that their efforts are making a difference, and sharing these wins with parents and other teachers and staff as a student's advocate. With the information they have about the student's attendance patterns, the mentor is also positioned to work with other staff in the school to ensure that the student has the appropriate supports and interventions in place. Are they skipping math because they just can't understand the material and have become disengaged as a result? Did they miss school last week because of a death in the family, which may mean they need extra emotional support? This is critical information that only a mentor can bring to the table, and in just a moment, Delia will talk about how this information can be shared. It's important to note that there are a lot of key best practices that Mentor and our partners have learned about for reaching out to students and families about the opportunity to receive a mentor, for recruiting the right types of mentors for this work, and for matching and supporting these relationships, which we'll discuss in a little more detail in our breakout session later. For example, the school must develop a strategy for reaching out to families and welcoming them to the program, as well as orienting them to the program in a strength-based manner. So we hope you'll join us later to hear more about these key practices.
Thanks, Abby. So I want to zero in a little bit into these weekly student success meetings. And if you talk to any of these 30 leaders across the country who have implemented the Success Mentors program, this is probably one of the things that they've had the most questions about and the most sort of wanting to put their heads together to figure out the right way to do this, because we all know nobody wants to have another meeting, right? We know our staff are busy, our teachers are busy, our principals are very, very busy, but this sharing of information, as Abby mentioned, is so critical to the success of this work and to make sure that, again, that all of our interventions, tiered interventions, are on target. So this just gives a depiction. Again, this comes from the Johns Hopkins team and the work of Bob Belfance. This just gives a picture of who should be at this meeting. So the goal of this meeting is to collaborate strategically for improved outcomes across the board. That means, you know, the school can inform the mentor about different things that are going on with the school that the mentor and the mentee can tap into, right? School supports or student supports that are available that the mentor can highlight for the parent or the family. Meanwhile, the mentor can share some patterns that their student has faced with transportation and note that, you know, perhaps other students are facing the same types of issues. So it's really an information sharing gathering, and it certainly needs to be grounded in a very accurate and up-to-date picture of individual student attendance. We can't stress that enough. But yeah, so who's in this room? We feel that from the work that we've done and from what we've heard from these communities, that it's really important for the principal to have a presence in these meetings, right? That is the leader of the school showing that they feel that this is important and that we have to take it seriously, and also that the principal cares about individual students' needs and is really listening and hearing those out. I don't know as much about, you know, how folks have adapted these meetings to include the principal maybe sometimes and not all of the time, but I do think that what we have learned is that the principal does need to have a presence in the school. The success mentors are there. These, as we said earlier, these might be school staff, they may be teachers, so it may be difficult to find a time that works for everyone, but that's a really critical piece of it, is making sure that they can attend. And then we also want to highlight those folks in orange on the slide, the CBO leaders. This is hugely important. The community-based organizations that are integrated with the school environment, if you have a community school model and you've got integrated student supports, right there in the school environment, this might be a little bit easier for you to involve, the after-school program, the health clinic, the mental health clinic that is related to the school or has a relationship with the school. Maybe there's even community-based mentoring programs that you can bring into your school environment. And then there's also national service corps members that are a huge part of this success. If you look at the 30 communities that have scaled this work, they've really, really leveraged national service programs like AmeriCorps, AmeriCorps Vista, Senior Corps, et cetera. Those programs have been huge in terms of bringing more caring adults into the school environment and making sure that, you can meet the needs of the students that are waiting for a mentor. However, those folks do need to they have to have a seat at the table. The leadership of that organization needs to be looped in to make sure that they understand the role of the mentors and that you're able to synchronize your services and ensure that you're working collaboratively together and in concert. So just want to highlight, number one, the importance of national service as a partnership that can really help move things forward, and then, to that same point, the importance of these meetings as a way to connect the dots between everybody who's working together to make this happen. So here's just another list of key best practices from what we've learned so far. We think it's important for this meeting to take place on the same day and the same time each week and follow a standard agenda. Again, we want folks to take it seriously. We want them to be there. Again, being led by the principal or a designee of the principal if the principal is not available, including the success mentors or the lead success mentors. So some schools have put in place a model where, the mentors inform one person who then represents them and shares the information that they want to share. It takes some additional organizing, but it is a way to kind of work around schedules. Again, involving community-based partners, national service folks. And then I just wanted to highlight, too, I know a lot of schools and districts have been a little bit concerned about just the sensitive handling of data. That's something that a lot of schools and districts are focused on, and just wanting to make sure that they're handling attendance data and student data confidentially. So this is a good place to make sure that, community-based partners have signed confidentiality agreements so that they can be a part of these meetings and review the student-level data. So there's a lot to think about there, but we want to make sure that we highlight the importance of that, before those meetings take place, just making sure that you discuss that with your community-based partners. We certainly don't want to imply that that should be an obstacle, because we think that those relationships are so important, but just something to be aware of. And again, this is where there's a major difference when it comes to peer mentoring, because obviously you're not going to be sharing information about students with other students, right? So if your mentors are peers, if they are also students, you're not going to share that level of information. You may design, a more general program that promotes attendance while you kind of facilitate, maybe the leader of that program who's an adult would be involved in these meetings. So it's just a lot to think about in terms of your model and who should be in this room and how to sort of address confidentiality when it comes to these meetings.
So we've given you a sense of what Success Mentors programs can look like and how they can be effective in connecting students and families with the supports that they need, as well as helping design whole school student and family engagement strategies that really work. But a lot goes into making this happen, so we wanted to mention the elements of effective practice for mentoring. As we mentioned earlier, this is the research and practitioner-informed resource that Mentor has developed, which provides standards and benchmarks for safe and effective mentoring programs. There are 6 elements: recruiting mentors and mentees, screening mentors, training mentors, matching mentors and mentees, monitoring and supporting these relationships, and guiding mentors and mentees towards healthy closure of their relationships. Poorly implemented mentoring programs can do more harm than good, so we encourage anyone looking to start a mentoring program to review these standards and benchmarks to get a sense of the infrastructure and practices they'll need to put in place to build an effective mentoring program. Luckily, this is available freely online. You can simply Google it or find it on Mentor's website, which is mentoring.org. At 4:45 Eastern Time, our breakout session on implementing a school integrated mentoring program will dig more deeply into each of these elements. We've also created a checklist for Success Mentors programs that highlights key considerations based on the elements that are specific to Success Mentors programs, as well as no-cost resources that can help you implement best practice. You'll be able to find the link to that at the end of this slide deck.
Thanks, Abby. And along with the elements of effective practice, I did want to highlight a few key concepts. We can't possibly do justice to these really, really important sort of frameworks that this model, from our point of view, should really be grounded in. But I do want to highlight them and share with you that, as we've rolled this out in so many communities, and in particular, Mentor has really served as a technical assistance provider and a support to the schools that are doing this work. What we've made sure to train mentors on and train school staff on are really the things on this list. And I've mentioned them, throughout our conversation today. You may be familiar with some more than others, but we just think it's so important to kind of go into this work from these lenses because we think that these concepts are so integral to the success of these programs. So, first and foremost, if you're going to integrate a mentoring program into your school, it's got to be grounded in positive youth development, right? Which is really, I think there's lots of definitions for this concept, but it's really an intentional effort for adults to help students build skills, build on their interests, build on their abilities. So we want that to be the focal point of this work. And along those lines, you'll see on this list youth-centered. We feel that these programs should be youth-centered. They should involve partnering with students and uncovering what are the students' goals for themselves, right? This work will not be effective, and really no mentoring relationship or relationship is effective unless the young person's own goals and own perspectives are really taken into account and centered in the relationship. So a lot goes into that, and we train quite a bit on how to do that when we talk with mentors about how to build these relationships. We know that these programs have to be culturally relevant. They have to be grounded in cultural competence. We think it's important to train mentors directly on what that looks like for the particular community that they're working with, and that's really going to vary from community to community. But we do have some tools and resources that we can share around that that are more general for mentors if folks are interested. We always welcome for you to reach out to us about that. And then this idea of developmental relationships, which comes from the Search Institute, which is just the idea that rather than telling a young person what to do and coming from this prescriptive point of view of, I know what's best for you, we really come from this developmental perspective where the change agent is the relationship, right? If you have a strong, trusting, authentic relationship with a student, you're going to be able to inspire them to move toward their own goals, and that's really our goal here is to align, our work with students vision for themselves and what they would like to see happen. So that's so important. Again, time and time again, we say that this is a strengths-based model, and I think it's important for us to keep our eyes on that because it's really important to forget, I think, with a lot of the traditional structures we have in place, not just in schools, but also in mentoring programs, we don't always think about students' strengths. We often think about their deficits. When we talk about chronic absenteeism, we're really talking about a problem. So we want to really try to reframe the way we think and the way our mentors think to focus more on what students are doing well because we know that, encouraging them from that place is really going to do wonders for the way that they see themselves, among many other things that will do. And then finally, we want everyone to know who's considering doing or launching a mentoring program at their school that they should really, before they start doing that work, really put the time into looking at what does the evidence say about how to do a mentoring program or run a mentoring program effectively and safely. We know schools know very, very much how to screen folks and make sure that they're bringing safe people into the school, but there's a lot more that goes into it. Recruiting the folks who have the right mindset for mentoring. What does that look like? How do you engage families and make sure that they understand the program? Because if they don't, they may not necessarily want to support their student in being a part of it. So there's just a lot of sort of tried and true practices that we now have that are detailed in the elements of effective practice, and we hope you'll check that out. We'll link to it a little bit later. So at this point, I'd like to transition into our panelists, into speaking to our panelists a little bit here. This is Dr. Daryl Davis, who is on the line. He's been waiting patiently for us to get through all of this content and this sort of foundation building that we wanted to kind of give a framework for you all. But we really appreciate Dr. Davis being on the call today to paint a picture of what this has looked like in Kansas City Public Schools. So I'll give you a brief introduction to Dr. Davis, and then Dr. Davis, I'd love to ask you some questions. But Dr. Daryl Davis has been with Kansas City Public Schools for 23 years, and he has extensive experience as an educational administrator. Throughout his tenure, he has implemented long-term evidence-based strategies to improve outcomes for students. And Dr. Davis is the recipient of the Joseph B. Whitehead Educator of Distinction Award, which was awarded by the Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation, as well as the Ida B. Wells Risk Taker Award, awarded by the National Alliance of Black School Educators. As the Assistant Superintendent of Innovation and Special Projects, Dr. Davis has been at the helm of the district's efforts to launch and scale a Success Mentors initiative to bring mentors to 7,500 students within 5 years. So, you know, just saying that, I'm pretty wowed by that goal, and I think a lot of people are. So we're really eager to talk with you, Dr. Davis, and hello and welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, and good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to participate on the call today.
Absolutely. How's the weather out there in Kansas City this morning?
It's starting to cool down a little bit. I think we're in the 40s this morning. Hopefully it's warming up outside.
Oh, good. All right. This has been a weird fall over here in Boston where Mentor is based, so we're always curious. But yeah, I won't waste any time because I know we're already running out of time, and I want to ask you a couple of questions. So I'll start with the one that is sort of has been on my mind, which is why did your district choose to pursue a mentoring program to support your students in the first place?
Well, the initiative actually started with a conversation that I had with our new superintendent, Dr. Mark Bedell, maybe about a year and a half ago. He and I discussed some of our similar experiences from when we were principals, where we both ran mentoring programs, and we saw firsthand the impact that a mentoring program can have on a school. And at that time, he shared a vision. He said it would be nice if we could have at least 50% of our students in this district involved in a mentoring program. And that was more or less an informal conversation. But then about 5 months later, he approached me and he said, it's time for you to make this vision a reality. And so he created a new position to allow me to launch mentoring programs with the goal of achieving the 50% of students involved in mentoring programs over the next 5 years. And so with that charge, many may ask, well, why Success Mentors? And so because we needed to start somewhere, Success Mentors provided a framework to start with those who are most at risk, those who are not coming to school because they're missing so much school that they're at risk for academic failure. And as we focus those efforts on grades 6 through 9, I'm also designing several other mentoring programs that will launch within the next few months. The Success Mentors is definitely aligned to our strategy to keep kids in school, reduce dropout rates, and improve academic achievement.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. It's helpful to hear about the background because I think a lot of the folks that we have on the call today, you know, maybe in that sort of pre-contemplative stage of figuring out, you know, is this right for my school? Is this right for my district? Maybe have done mentoring to some extent, but not necessarily full-blown, and it seems like that's really what Kansas City is trying to do, is really scale this and make this a reality for the students who need it. So thank you for sharing that. I think my next question for you, one of our goals today was really to connect early warning systems and mentoring. So I wanted to ask you, how did you connect the data that you've been collecting about student attendance and the other early warning systems, strategies that you're putting in place, to the way that you designed your mentoring programs? And you can certainly speak to Success Mentors as well as some of the other mentoring initiatives that you've been working on.
Well, we normally look at our data weekly, but in building out the mentoring program, we definitely looked at whole school, and we have a number of schools whose test scores place them in the lowest 10% of schools in the state. So we knew we wanted that cohort or group of schools to be in our first set of schools to implement this model. We also looked at attendance rates to see which schools had low numbers of students that were attending school 90% of the time. That's our state's requirement. Missouri requires that 90% of students are at school 90% of the time, and so we have a number of schools that are not meeting that requirement, and so those schools also made it into the pool. When we began to look at individual students, we're looking at which groups of students are not coming to school, whether it's, say, the homeless population, maybe it's exceptional education, maybe it's our immigrant population, maybe it's our middle school boys, whichever subgroups there may be. We were able to design some specific strategies around that to focus mentor efforts around those particular populations of students. Some of the grade levels that we looked at as well showed high levels of chronic absence last year. I'll just focus on one in particular. Our ninth grade students ended the year last year with more than a third of our ninth graders missing at least 10% of school, which means they missed at least 18 days of school. Some could have missed 30, some could have missed 45, but we had over 33% in that category. And so when we think about improving academics, and if we were to look at our Algebra 1 scores, for example, it would be difficult to pinpoint, do we need to improve professional development? Do we need to improve our curriculum? We really would not be able to pinpoint any of those areas until we first get all students to attend school by identifying those root causes that are barriers to their success so that they are in school. And what we believe is that if a third of students are missing the instruction, then they just simply weren't present, and that's why they may have had difficulties in mathematics. And so we do believe that by first focusing on attendance and making sure that students have the safety nets they need through the help and support of a mentor, that their academic achievement will rise along with their attendance.
Absolutely. Yeah, that really resonates with a lot of the things that we train on and what we believe over here as well, and why we think this work is so important. So thank you for sharing that as well. It's helpful to hear some specific examples. Yeah, I think, I'm just interested in knowing, too, if you have any tips or insights that you would want to share with other schools or districts who are considering this strategy, maybe some lessons learned or even some stories that you might have that can kind of help illustrate some tips that you have for folks.
Oh, yeah, sure, definitely. For any school district that is thinking about implementing this particular model, it would be great to first generate some buy-in from all your stakeholders around the notion that relationships matter. It should be a district priority. It should be evident to all employees by way of does mentoring appear in the district's strategic plan, or do individual school improvement plans show that relationships are important? Is it mentioned in board policy, et cetera? Also, districts should build an awareness of the importance of attendance and how chronic absence impacts academic achievement. And so much of the pre-work before this Success Mentor implementation was around presenting to school board members, at principals meetings, at presentations throughout the community, so that individuals can understand attendance and how chronic absence was impacting student achievement, and then people can understand why we then launched this initiative as a direct response to chronic absence. I would say that it's okay for districts to start slow. We started with a couple of pilot schools. We had some lessons learned through that. We saw that we needed to add a site-based coordinator position so that we had someone boots on the ground in that building that could facilitate efforts that allowed those of us at the Board of Education to focus our efforts on recruiting mentors from the community, processing them. That would include applications, background checks, matching, et cetera, and then allowed the site-based coordinators to focus on identifying students per their data, putting permission slips in their hands for parents to sign off on those and so forth. And what we found going into this year is that if you just keep moving one step in front of the other, that champions will emerge. So we had one principal, for example. She actually had all 43 of her staff members to get trained as success mentors, and so we're in the process of matching each of them to a student just this week. And so that particular principal now allows us to highlight her and then to show other principals that if she, through her leadership, her buy-in, her passion around this initiative can get nearly 100% of her staff, then, others can do the same. And then also we've had some other champions emerge from our site-based coordinators that are taking the mentoring to another level, adding an after-school component, making it also into a club. So the students have their mentors that come in from outside the building that check on them each week, but then the coordinator also allows them to meet as a group so that they feel like they're a part of something special and they're, building that camaraderie amongst one another. And so we'll be able to highlight him as well, that coordinator. And so those are just some of the suggestions that I would have around just building consensus, building that buy-in from all of your stakeholders, and then sharing the success of your program to your various stakeholders. You may need to partner with your communications department to help get the word out, but as individuals hear that the program is working, not necessarily in terms of number of students, but more around the fact that students with a mentor are coming to school more with the help and support of that mentor, and then those mentors begin to be your greatest recruiters. They're going to tell about the great experience they're having with their mentees. I was near a mentor just yesterday, one person that works at the Board of Education. She returned to the BOE after having her session with her mentee, and she was just sharing with 5 or 6 others that, we were kicking it off, hitting it off, I should say, having just a great time. And then her mentee said, will you be back next week? And so that relationship is beneficial to both the student and the adult, and then those adults who will go out and tell other adults, and then more people sign up to get trained. So just take it one step at a time, and you begin to build momentum.
Oh, man, I love the way you illustrate how contagious that energy can be with something like that, and it's certainly not easy to start the process at times. The idea of consensus building that you mentioned, I know that's so much more work than it sounds like when it comes to doing these presentations, sort of trying to build the buy-in that you need to get this off the ground. But it's really, it's great the way you illustrate how that really can work. And I also love the point you make about really empowering the site coordinator, because we know from the session we're going to do later that there's so much work that goes into making sure that these matches are successful. And so we want to give that person the time and the space to really focus on that. While we also have leaders at your level building the case, doing, the high-level work that needs to get done to make this happen. So just want to thank you so much, Dr. Davis. Yeah, please, jump in if there's anything else you want to share.
I was going to share a story if there's time from one of our pilot schools. So we piloted this program at an elementary last school year, Banneker Elementary, and at the time, the reason we chose Banneker is because it was had the second lowest attendance rate for all elementary schools in the district. I believe only 56% of students were meeting the 90% requirement, or the requirement of being in school 90% of the time. And so through the intel that he was receiving from the mentors, so there were about 8 students that revealed to their mentors their root cause for why they were not coming to school. is that they did not have clean clothes. And so as a former high school principal, I was used to students dressing out for PE or, gym class. However, we all know at the elementary level, students run around in their uniform in gym class and at recess, and so it doesn't take long for those musty armpits to sink in, and so a lot of kids were just simply staying home until their families could get to the laundromat. And so as the mentors were reporting this and it was being discussed in the weekly attendance meetings, the principal decided, I want to remove this from being a reason why kids are not coming. And so he raised money for a washer and dryer, and a community agency actually helped him to raise that money, and they raised that money within 24 hours because of the help and support. And that's kind of what you're speaking to earlier with the those community-based organizations. They definitely could help bring in additional resources. But once he brought in the washer and dryer, students would bring dirty clothes to school. Those clothes were washed while students were in class, and then they take clean clothes home at the end of the day. And that may have been one solution to what mentors were finding out, but then there were other solutions put in place. And so this year, the school is, last week, almost 85% of the students were meeting the 90% requirement, which is up from 56% before we launched this initiative last year. So definitely it's working, and you mentioned that mentoring culture, how it's contagious. So we had 3 members of a local church get trained maybe several weeks ago. I just received an email last night from one of those mentors, and they went back and recruited more. They said, Dr. Davis, we have 30 more members from our church that want to get trained, and so they said they'll be there for that. So it just keep going, and we'll get students the needed assistance they need through those caring adults and through those positive relationships.
Yeah, oh man, those examples really just make it so real. I mean, I think here at, at Mentor, doing this national work, we talk so much about these concepts, but to hear, that solution that came out of that weekly meeting is just one example of, I'm sure, so many that you could share with us.
Yes.
We really appreciate you making this a little bit more real and bringing those examples and sharing those with everyone.
All right, thank you very much.
For your leadership. Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Davis, for your leadership and for joining us today. And actually, I think we do want to transition into Q&A, so if you have a few minutes to hold on in case folks have questions for you, that'd be great.
Okay, will do.
Okay. So we'd now like to open up the floor for some questions from the audience. Linda, what questions have you been seeing coming from the audience today?
Well, we haven't seen any questions just yet, but we are open for questions if any of our attendees have any they'd like to ask.
Okay, great. Okay. Actually, I do see one here for Daryl. So Daryl, I'm going to throw this one your way. What tips do you have for recruiting mentors for your program? You spoke to this just now a little bit, but given how busy school staff already are and, teachers being so tapped already, do you have any tips for recruiting mentors to share?
Yes, I do. I use a targeted approach. I believe that by looking at some of your larger employers in the area, you can start with them. Some of the employers actually allow for their workers to mentor or volunteer on company time because it may be a part of their mission to give back and be a value add to the community. And so about a month ago, I met with a gas company, and they sent immediately 9 members to be trained, and then I received a call last week. They have additional members that are coming on board. Just Monday, I met with the local deputy fire department chief, and he actually has committed, between 400 and 700 firefighters to come in and become mentors. And so we're going to have a follow-up meeting here within the next week or so with some other fire station chiefs. I'm not certain what their titles are, but that just came from this week, and so you just never know if you reach out to those large employers. This deputy fire chief, he said, "You had me at hello," and he said, "We want to be a part of this." And so, you know, if you meet with 20 companies, you may just hit a gold mine, as I have on several occasions, and then that will continue to inspire others. When one company hears that 3 other companies are involved, they're going to see, you know, what they can do to help as well.
That is so true. That is so true. Yeah, I love that example. I just think that, I mean, what we find when we do mentor trainings is it's so fascinating. We'll ask one question, and I think it really gets people excited. It's just like, did you have a mentor? And whether the answer is yes or no, people really feel, you know, impassioned to be part of the solution when, you know, when they think about that. So I think that's just so well illustrated by the examples you shared.
Yeah.
We do have a few more questions, Delia
Great.
and Gerald and Abby. The next question is, how do you address FERPA, especially when using outside people or older students?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what we did is we added to the permission slip that parents sign, we added a statement in there where they're giving their mentors access to their data. And so the mentors can see their mentees' attendance data, and they'll also see how they performed with their grade cards. And so then that is then added into the conversations that they have with young people to help them set, you know, realistic goals. And so the parents have authorized and allowed, just like any other caseworker may be given permission to have access to that data, and then we scan that into our student information system so that everyone can see that the parent signed off for that authorization.
And speaking of parents, what tips do you have for communicating with parents and families about the purpose of the program and why their child is getting a mentor?
Well, we definitely communicate to families and attempt to share in a letter that is sent out the benefits for being involved in the mentoring program. There are some parents who, just hearing the word mentor, they you know, request to have their student involved. And so since we're focused on grades 6 through 9, we do have some parents who are requesting mentors, and maybe their child is not in the chronic absence category. And so our instructions to schools have been, as long as you first connected mentors to every student that's on the chronic absence list, then they're able to connect the excess mentors to other students within our target range to help keep them on track as well. And our belief is that relationships matter and that everyone can benefit from a mentor. And so our consistent message out to families as well as the community is that mentoring is just a part of our new culture that we're building in Kansas City, and that everyone can benefit from a mentor, not just those who are at risk.
Thank you for highlighting that. That's so key in the language that you put in those materials. Absolutely. Yeah. Daryl, thank you so much for joining us. I think you have illustrated those concepts more than we ever could, so I'm certainly glad you took those questions and not us, because you were the right person to answer them. I think at this point we probably need to wrap up because we only have 3 more minutes, and I want to share a couple of additional resources with the folks who have been on the call. We really appreciate everyone's participation and joining us today, and again, just want to shout you out, Dr. Davis, for joining us. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So next here, I just have a couple of quick reminders and resources that I want to share, and I believe you all will receive this deck after the webinar, so you'll be able to click these links. But we just wanted to share some research with you. I know Abby shared some statistics about mentoring and some of the outcomes that it can have. So there's a great sort of a research brief called Mentoring and Investment in Fostering Academic Achievement that we encourage you to click on if you are interested in learning more. We've got some interesting resources and research on school-based mentoring that you may be interested in, and there's a great Success Mentors implementation guide that was actually created out of the MBK effort through the Department of Education in 2016. So that's linked to there. And then Mentor also developed a checklist for programs that are launching Success Mentors programs that's mapped to the elements of effective practice. And we're actually going to be focusing a lot on that later today. So if you're interested in that, you should join us at 4:45 Eastern Time. Here's just some additional things we've mentioned: the elements of effective practice, the National Mentoring Resource Center, another resource on creating Success Mentor Core, and then something that Attendance Works created, which is called the Elementary Success Mentor Toolkit. Mentor also has a page on our website where we have a ton of resources that are relevant to Success Mentors programs. I did want to show you one other thing briefly. So if you see in the Handouts tab here, we do have a handout that we created in partnership with Massachusetts Mentoring Partnership, which really just kind of prompts you to think about some of the things that Daryl was mentioning earlier about building a culture of relationships at your school. How is your school already doing this, and what ways can you build on what you're already doing? So these questions are really intended for you to kind of bring to your team at your school or district and think about, you know, what might you want to do first in terms of taking some action after what you've learned today. So that's just designed to help you with that, and you can download it from the deck that we have here if you click on the Handouts tab. It should also be emailed out to you afterwards. One final thing, I know we're right at the end here, just want to show you that we do have some additional webinars that might be of interest to you coming up on these topics, and you can register by clicking this link once you receive the slide deck. Mentor is actually facilitating this next one on supporting youth in the wake of violence and trauma, given some of the very tragic things that we've seen in the news lately, just helping young people work through some of the things that they might be feeling in reaction to those events. So we do hope you join us for some of these, and I just want to thank you all again for taking the time out today to participate.
And thanks, Dr. We especially want to thank Delia and Abigail and Dr. Davis, and we would really like to encourage everyone to stay on the site and participate in just a few quick polling questions, because these responses really do help us to improve our approach and know what content is most useful. So we would sincerely appreciate your feedback. Again, thank you so much to our presenters and their panelists, and we hope that you found it helpful and informative.
Thanks, Linda.